Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Irgin Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yaakov Smith Shlita on the Bracha on fragrant foods. That great Scotia sponsoring a shir called Irgin Shir Torah at 718-851-8651.
As we always say, the best shirim are the product of questions that people asked. We heard a shayla recently, someone in his house, they were making applesauce with cinnamon. It was cooking, and there was extremely strong smell of both the apples and the cinnamon. And the question is, do you make a bracha on that? After all, apples and cinnamon are both priya eitz. Should you make the bracha of nice and reach type of peiros if they're cooking something that has a very strong smell? I guess we have to look ahead. This Thursday, Ba'aleinu Tov will be Tu B'Shvat. Someone has a fruit platter, and you uncover a fruit platter. There's a very strong smell of fruit. You make a bracha on that. This past Yom Kippur, we had a shayla that really caught my attention. In some Batei Midrashim, they want to help people supplement the Meya Brachas, because Yom Kippur was short into the Meya Brachas. So they have actually a tray of 5 different items to make the 5 different brachas of Reach. And they asked me, what's better to put as far as the bracha of nice and Reach type of peiros? A lemon, an esrog, coffee beans that has a strong fragrance, and as I learned, none of them are pashut, and we have to try to decide what's the best option. And if we have time, hopefully we'll talk about a shayla that Nebuchadnezzar Negeya today, where some people lost their sense of smell. They don't smell any longer. The question is, do they make the bracha as far as Bar Min B'Samim for havdalah on Matzai Shabbos? So if you notice, the common denominator of all our shaylas, whether it's apples, sauce, or coffee beans, or even cloves, this is the question of making a bracha on food that has a good smell. In the past we discussed fragrances and perfumes, and whether it's artificial perfumes. The focus today is a smell that comes from an item that's a food item. Coffee beans, cinnamon, apples, lemons. So I think really our derech is to find one yesod. Today we have to focus on a very simple question. Can we assume that the bracha of reach on foods is similar to the halachas of bracha rishayna on foods? In other words, a lemon is a bar priyates, presumably. So if we could assume that the bracha of reach on foods is similar to the bracha rishayna on foods, then it should be simple. What bracha to make on coffee beans? What bracha to make on cinnamon? Then we'll apply it to hilchas berachas hareich. If you'll tell me that for some reason a lemon today is not a bar priya eitz, because you can't eat it plain, then maybe the bracha will also be affected. So the question, to put it simply, is, does hilchas berachas reich on foods, does that follow the regular bracha rishayna on foods? Or maybe the fact is you don't ingest the food when you smell it, maybe it has its own set of brachas. So we have to learn a piece of Gemara in brachas that Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Gemara asks an interesting question. Minayin shemavarchen al birch al reach. How do you know you make a bracha on reach? Shenemah, the pasuk in Tehillim, Kol haneshama tahalel ka. Eiza davash haneshama nenes v'loy haguf. Which hana is a purely neshama benefit and not the guf? Have you oimezeh reach? So right away the Gemara is surprising. The Slach in fact asks, why do you have to have a special source for birchas hareich? If there's hana, you make a bracha, just like you make a bracha on foods. But what's very surprising, Gemara makes a seemingly strange statement. The Gemara is assuming that the guf doesn't enjoy reich. We live in a world, there's a tremendous industry and perfumes and deodorants and colognes. People enjoy smells. What do you mean, the guf doesn't have hana? But let's move on. The Torah and the Shulchan Aruch add a word or two to Lashon HaGemara. And the Shulchan Aruch begins, Reish Tezayin, Asa lehanais mireach toiv achi yivarech. Not just it's a mitzvah to make a bracha on besamim, it's also to have hana from any scented item before you make a bracha. Now this is a chiddush, because you look at the Gemara that I just read in Brachas Mem Gimel, all it says is you have to make a bracha. It doesn't say there's an issa without a bracha, but the answer is probably simple. Because we all remember the Gemara in Brachas Mem Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, Asa la'adam lehen yehenem min al-zeh b'loi bracha. Regarding bracha rishayna, not only is a mitzvah to make a bracha, but there's an issa to eat without a bracha. So obviously the Torah and Shulchan Aruch assumed that since we see from this pasuk kol neshama, there's a chiyuv to make a bracha on reyach, it has the same guidelines. It's not just a nice thing to do, but the nice thing to do, the bracha, brings an issa to have a no without a bracha. So that might be an indication that we do compare hilchas reyach to hilchas bracha rishayna. It's not just a mitzvah to make a bracha, but it's an issa to smell without a bracha. Now this, of course, adds a sense of urgency to our sugya. To smell without a bracha is an issa. And as we sometimes thought, before we learned, that, the bracha b'samim is a Matzoi Shabbos experience. You make a bracha on b'samim. Now we see there's an issa to enjoy smell without a bracha. So does that mean that when you're at home and the Rabbi's are making applesauce, you have to put on a mask? Or you're walking on 44th Street and 15th Avenue, which is the center for baking bread with an extremely tantalizing smell of bread, you have to go with a mask? But the emphasis we see in a certain sense that Berchas Reach is even more chama than Berchas Hanenin. Because the Ramah on the end of Reish Tezayin, I guess lucky for us, discusses whether you have to make a bracha on freshly baked bread. It's a suffix, and the Ramah recommends, therefore don't smell bread at all. Now, usually the rule is suffix brachas lahakol, you're allowed to eat if you have a suffix without a bracha. And here the Ramah says we have a suffix berachas hanen and don't smell. So Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Shlomo Zalman both mechavan to the same yisoid, and they both explain that a person has to eat. So if you have a suffix, you're allowed to eat without a bracha. But reyach, you can live without reyach, and therefore berachas reyach is more chama than bracha rishayna. Suffix bracha, don't smell. No suffix brachas lahakol. So now we're a little scared. That means berachas hareyach is more chama than berachas hanenin. So you really need a mask if you have a smell that you're not making a bracha on. But then again, as the Tzlach asks in Mem Gimel Amud Beis, why did the Gemara ask me now you make a bracha on reyach? It's possible you have to make a bracha on reyach. Asa lahena b'lai bracha. So it seems that there's a certain quality in reyach that's different than regular hana. And the emphasis we find a tremendous kula, a tremendous chiluk between smell and foods, which is based on a Beferish Mishnah in Brachas Nun Aleph Mebeis. But I'll read the lashon of the Mishnah, the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Yud Zayin Aleph. Ein mevorchen al hareyach el im kein nasa l'hariyach. The Aleph of Berchas Hareyach is it has to be that you have this reyach to enjoy the smell. And then the Shulchan Aruch gives 3 examples of a real boisim, a real fragrance, but you don't make a bracha because the kavanah is not to enjoy it, it's to offset a bad smell. And again, it's based on a Mishnah, but they didn't have refrigeration, and how could you keep a mace from not the bad smell of the mace? So they would keep samim next to the mace. Or they would keep samim in a beis hakisei before the rooms were ventilated like we have today. Or stam, a person, for personal hygiene, he takes some type of fragrance to take away the smell of the zuhama, the sweat. So we have 3 cases, the Shulchan Aruch says, even though it's a qualifying reyach, but you don't make a bracha because your intention is to offset the bad smell. So we see, if you enjoy b'samim, you make a bracha. If you do to take away the smell of mace or of perspiration or beis hakisei, you don't make a bracha. Now this is a pliya, because why do you have to have kavana? Was it mitzvah srichas kavana? But the question is stronger. Regarding eating, we don't look at kavana. The person eats, he makes a bracha. How do I know? Ferashi Gemara. Brachas lamed ches amud aleph. where the Gemara says, oichlin umashkin, that a person eats exclusively for refuah, he makes a bracha. And that's the Shulchan Aruch Reish Dalet Siv Ches, even though he's eating the refuah, but kiven the isle hanomine ba'i bruche. Rashi says, Hare Meichalu. So now we have a double question. Why is Reyach dependent on Kavana? And why is it different than Berchas Achila? But there's a second halacha. A second big kula, a second big chilik between foods and Reyach. And this is also a Gemara. I'll read the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Tezayin Beis. Even if you have a fruit that has a very strong fragrance, but if you take it to eat and your kavan is not lahariach, you don't make a bracha. The Bialoch in the beginning of Reish Yud Zayin gives a fascinating example. You walk into an offtake, that's a drugstore, uptake, and there's plenty of herbs that have a good smell. You don't make a bracha, because the herbs are not there to make a good smell, it's there to sell. So now we see a second prerequisite for the bracha of Reyach. Not only it can't be for something else, for the bad smell of a mace or a beis hakisei, but even if it's there, but you have to have kavana l'riach. And again we ask, why? Why is this different than the bracha of achila? So here we come to an important yesod that will give us enough guidance for the rest of the shir. Imagine someone goes on Chalamoid, he goes to botanical gardens. I know today that's a pretty outdated Chalamoid trip, the children need much more exciting, but it's a beautiful place to go to enjoy the Bernstein's world. There's plenty of Berchas Reyach there. He spends 3 hours, he's almost holding by Achila Gasa in Reyach. Now he finishes, he goes, I should really bench. I had Kedei Svi of Reyach. Why don't you make a bracha chayin on Reyach? But it can't, because the Mishnah Zok Nishtazai. The Mishnah Nida after the Aleph Mad Beis says there are some things that make a bracha rishayna, but ein tom bracha la'achrav. Zok the Gemara la'suya reichni. Reyach, the bracha of on smell, there's a bracha rishayna, not a bracha achrayna. Question is why? So Rashi says 2 words, hana mu'etes. It's a minimal hana. Now I want to be very careful to explain that, because the truth is we can never underestimate the cheshivus of Reyach. Reyach is very similar to Ruchni, Reichni and Ruchni. Kaviyachal, the Bernstein doesn't eat or drink, but the Bernstein has a Reichni, enjoys a Reichni Choyach. Reyach is very closely related to a Ruchnius. Mashiach has a Chush HaReyach, like the Pasuk says. Could go on, but Reyach is a very sublime Hana. But in the same time, Reyach is a Hana she'ein lo yikar. You could have 3 hours in botanical gardens, but there's nothing left. This doesn't have time to digest like food. It's not satisfying like food. And that's one of the pshatim of Rashi, that there's no bracha achrayna on Reyach, even if you enjoy it in a very intense way, because as soon as you finished, it's like it's digested. It's like food after digestion. In other words, first of all, there's no svia. If you're hungry, it doesn't help you satisfy your hunger. And additionally, the Reyach comes and is gone. And Taka the Machabin, beginning of Reish Tezayin, says there's no bracha achrayna. And the Taz explains, V'daima la'oichel shenis akel b'meyav. It's like food after the digestion period. So here we see a unique feature of Birchas Reyach. Something very special, very ruchniistic, true, but it's also a Reyach, it's hana mu'etes, it's a davar she'ein lo yikar. Now we understand why the bracha is only said when there's kavana. And this yesod I found be'ikar in one of the Rishonim, the Sefer Ma'oros, printed on by Rabbi Blau, it's printed on Masechta Brachis, on our sugya. He taka asked the question, so why is halacha that if you're not mechaven for Reyach, or you put it in a beis hakisei, there's no bracha? So he says that the real chiyuv bracha was only niskan by a davar sheyesh by mamish, and there's a tzairach haguf. But Reyach is a minimal hana. It's an aim by ikka. It's not an ikka hana, and therefore it's limited only when you have kavana lahariach. The Beis Yosef says, just out a line, areach she'ein lo ikka lo mevorach ki she'ekim she'ein lo tzoyrech gadol kol kach. I saw a beautiful tshuva in the Karen LaDavid in Simon Nun Hey. Someone asked him, he's walking past a garden that has many fragrant flowers. Does he make a bracha? So he told him, no, you have to have kavana l'ariach, it has to be made for that. And he says the same hezbollah. And the embassy, the tzlach, who asked the kasha, why do you have to have a special pasuk for reyach? It's a regular hana. And the tzlach says, but in Hilchas Me'ilah, there's no Issa Me'ilah on reyach, unlike other hana. Must be, it's a limited type of hana. So be that as it may, we now understand this unique feature of Birchas Reyach, that it's basically hana she'ein lo ikar, and therefore it has to have two requirements. Number one, it has to be made to enjoy the smell, not to offset a offensive odor. And number two, even if it's a good reyach that's cooking in the house, it has to be kavana lahariach. So we understand. You're walking by in the bakery and the fresh smell of bread, the aroma is wafting out in front of you. So even though it's not made to offset a bad smell, but since there's no kavana lahariach, you don't have to make a bracha. And you don't have to put on a mask. Just like when a person has it in a bathroom, there's no chiyuv to wear a mask. It's not a qualifying hana. And therefore, if it's not a hana, there's no chiyuv bracha. So I'll put it very simply, it has to be a cheftza of besamim. It can't be made to offset a bad smell. And the gavra, the person has to be mechaven lahariach. So now, oy bazai, we come to a very surprising conclusion. Since it has to be made for the smell, that should indicate that if you have a food that has a good smell, there shouldn't be a bracha. Because food is made to eat, not to smell. When do you make the bracha on reyach? Simply, flowers, hadassim, herbs, balsam oil, musk is a fragrance, but food is made for food. It's almost like the reyach of in the Beis HaKisei. But that can't be. Because here we come to the Yesod of today, the Gemara in Brachas Mem Gimel. Haiman the murach besroiga, oy bechavush, if you smell an esrog or a quince, you make the bracha, shenasan reyach toiv beperis. We'll refer to it as the bracha of peris. What I mean, nasan reyach toiv beperis, some agoris ashenoisen reyach toiv. It's similar to the bracha of ashenoisen lasechvi or hanoisen. But basically the bracha we'll call the bracha of reyach on peris. Now we see, not only do you make a bracha on peris, there's a special bracha. In fact, the Rosh in Perik Vav and Bracha Siman Vav asks a question: why do you need a special bracha on nice and reach Paris? Why don't we say nice and Paris besamim like we say atse besamim? Zok the Rosh, excuse me, you can't say a fruit is besamim. A fruit is a food. Don't call it besamim. Hadassim is besamim because you can't eat it. Food is too chashed to be called besamim. So now we see the special prominence of this bracha. It's a special bracha on food, and the bracha indicates the cheshivas of food. But now I'm confused. Since food is there to eat, it's not lekavanas reyach. Why is there a bracha? So we ask this kasha Taisvis, and Taisvis daf mem gimel amid beis. He says, "V'dafka shmeriach behem, aber im bal lechol mehem ein levarich berchas hareyach ki im berchas achila." Tais seems to be saying you're right. If you're eating it, don't make a bracha. You make a bracha on the food and eskazun to hate. But if you're not eating it, it's there for reyach, then you make a bracha of Paris. The Rosh in Perik Zayin Siman Gimel takes it a step further. So wait. Zok the Rosh, if your kavana is lechal ula hariyach boy, if your kavana is to smell it and then eat it, then you make a bracha. You buy an apple for two purposes. You'll smell it and then you'll eat it. if you're eating it, and then as you're eating, hey, the riach bay, it smells. Kiven loy niskaven lareach, ein tzarich levarich. So the Rosh is even more specific, and let me explain. A bach in yeshiva asked me the shaila, his mother enjoys the smell of fruits. And she buys fruits not to eat it, they keep it in the house, just for the smell. So I asked him, is it to offset a bad smell? No, she enjoys the smell of fruits. That is the Gemara, the choladeis, you make a bracha. If you buy a fragrant fruit to eat, and you're eating it, you don't make a bracha, even though incidentally you're smelling it. But the Rosh is saying, let's say you decide to first smell it. So you make a bracha on the reach, and then when you get a chance you eat it, you make a bracha on the food. That's the shita of the Rosh, and the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Tezai and C base paskin like this. And there's a beautiful discussion in the Bir Halacha. He quotes the shita Mekubetzes and the Gra, and from both he comes to the conclusion that even if you buy fruit to eat, but if you make a conscious effort to first smell it, you pick it up, let me smell it, and you make the bracha on smell, gesund to hate. Then when you eat it, you make the bracha. That's the sheet of the bialacha. So it's possible on regular fruits, fragrant fruits, you make 2 brachas. However, the Chazon Ish in Siman Lamed Hey acknowledges that he doesn't accept the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch, but he holds that if you bought something to eat, it is labeled as food. And food is not a cheftza of reyach. Food is food, and p'sam is p'samim. In fact, he uses this lashon, if you're not meyachid it only la'riach, ein aleim shem b'samim linyan bracha. In other words, that person that enjoyed the smell of fruit and bought fruit only for the smell, that's the Gemara's case, you make a bracha on it. On esrog, most people don't eat, and you bought it just for the smell, then you make the bracha. But if you bought it to eat, and you first make step 1 for smell, it's not a shem baisim, it's not a cheftza b'samim. If it's not a b'samim, you can't make a bracha on it. And I must tell you that the Rav Polim in Beis Lamed says the minig in his city was, you don't make a bracha on regular fruit unless you bought it just for the smell. And again, you buy a pastel of esrog, just you like the smell, then you make a bracha. And I'm sure you realize that this question is extremely negeya. According to the halacha, you have to have a maisa nana, so a fruit is good. You decide to have ana. Like the Chazon Ish, it has to be a cheftza boisim. The nafkamina would be you buy a fragrant fruit to eat it, but you decide to smell it first. Like the bialach, you make a bracha, and like the Chazon Ish, you don't. The big question is, how do we paskin? I don't know about you, but I don't paskin Mishnah or Chazon Ish. But I will tell you what the Chazon Ish writes in a letter, that the psak of the Mishnah Berurah, hayra mikuyemes k'moy mi pisan hedrin. That's the way he accepted the Mishnah Berurah's psak. But more so, I'll tell you a maaseh pella. As you do, the Mishnah Berurah writes that if you're davening along Shemon Esrei and you miss the tzibah saying vayechulu, so get someone else to say it to have edus. And the Chazon Ish writes in the Sefer that's unnecessary. So Chaim Kanievsky, when he was young, he asked the Chazon Ish, what should I do? So he goes, you follow the Mishnah Berurah. I have to follow the Chazon Ish because that's what I am. I follow what my heart dictates. Tremendous insight that the Mishnah Berurah is the Paisik. Plus, don't forget, the Chazon Ish himself acknowledged that his psak is not like the Rosh and Shulchan Aruch. So we're not machriya, but I guess the Chazon Ish gave us the indication that we follow the Mishnah Berurah. So therefore, we have to follow that Chaz. We're going to apply this lemaisa. That basically there's a special bracha on reyach because it's a unique hana. But unique amongst the 5 brachas is the bracha of Paris. That even though it's a foodstuff and it has its own bracha, but there's a bracha on the hana. And I think the oimik of the bracha is astonishing. Hanoisin reyach toy beParis. Doesn't say Paris besamim, because a peri is more than besamim. The Rabbi gave us a double hana, an edible food, and it also has a reyach. So the fact is, we make a double bracha because there's a double benefit. So now, Lamais, let's apply this halacha, and I think hopefully we have enough guidance for all of our shaylas. So we'll start with the shaylas. We began with someone's cooking applesauce with cinnamon, two very strongly fragrant foods. But again, he's not cooking it for the smell. And the fact that it does smell is immaterial. So keep on walking around the house, doing what you have to do. You don't have to wear a mask. And Takadi Aruch HaShulchan, the end of Reish Tezayin says, we see so many times there are good smells in the home of a tafshil, reicha, noidif, and no one makes the bracha because no kavana lahariach. Question, do you have to try to stuff your nose? The answer is no. You don't have to wear a mask. It's not a chiyuv bracha. It's not like it's an oinus. Someone asked me, and I'm not familiar with this, but when they're trying to sell a house, they toast cinnamon. I guess that attracts customers. I bought a house without the smell of toasted cinnamon, but I don't know exactly how it works. But if they do it because they want you to enjoy the smell, then when you smell it, you make a bracha. But if you don't enjoy the smell, you just want to see the house, then ignore the smell and there's no bracha. Someone asked me an interesting question. I couldn't find this in the place. I don't know why. But if someone grills steak or barbecue steak and it's a very strong steak smell of meat, does he make a bracha? So the emphasis, it's not peiros, it's not atzei, but it's minimally boirei minei pesamim. Just like you make a bracha on musk, which is the extract of a deer. I didn't find this in the Paiskim, and it could be, as we'll soon see, it has to be a strong enough smell, a very unique smell. Cut grass is no bracha, even though it's isvei, but it has a smell, but it's not strong enough. So I would assume that the Paiskim don't speak about meat, even though there is a smell, but it's not a strong enough smell to qualify for a bracha. Question, I've had this shaila recently too many times, people either can't smell or not sure if they could smell. And now they're about to make havdalah, but I'm old to have a sense of smell. Can they first smell to see if they can make a bracha, and then they make a bracha if they could smell? Or someone has an old besamim, cloves, he's not sure if it still has a smell. He found an old besamim. Could he smell it first to see if it has a smell? Or someone that wants to buy a perfume which is authentic, in other words, it's a reyach sheyesh ba'ika and there is a bracha on it, but he's not sure this or that. Can he smell it without a bracha to know what to buy? So we have three questions where your kavanah is not lariach now, it's to see if you will have hana. So what came to my mind is, whoa, this is a beautiful nafkamina of our chakira. Because regarding birchas achila, we have a siman on Shulchan Aruch, the end of siman reish yud, mita'emes, tasting food does not require a bracha. So if mat'emes doesn't need a bracha regarding achila, maybe mita'emes pesamim, also there's an exemption. And indeed, the Kaf HaChaim and Reish Tezai and Gimel has two of our three questions. If you have a suffix, if this psamim has a smell or not, or you're not sure if you could smell or not, maybe as a cold or as a COVID leftovers, so to speak, you're not sure if you could smell, you're allowed to smell without a brach. I found Rav Scheinberg in the V'Zayis HaBracha, page 332, Taka says the other shaila. You want to buy a perfume, you want to taste, quote unquote, which to buy, no bracha. So here's a beautiful nafkamina, we compare Hilchas Besamim to Hilchas Achila. But then I saw the Birchas Habayis in Perik Chavav, Sif Lamrei Lamed, who asked a kasha. When do we say Meta Emes doesn't need a bracha? You toyim and pilot. You taste the cholent and spit it out. But here you can't expel what you smelled. Once you inhaled, you can't exhale. So you're having the full hana. How could you rely on Meta Emes not to make a bracha? You had the hana. Now, to me, like zechisi lahavin for two reasons. First of all, mi'ikid din, you look in Reish Yud, we paskin, like the Rambam, even toyim ubayleya, you don't make a bracha if you're having less than a kazayis, because your kavana is to taste, not to eat. But without that, we just learned a sugya that even if it has a perfect fragrance, if your kavana is not lahariach, it's either to offset a bad smell or it's not lahariach. You don't make a bracha. So if I'm smelling something to see if I have a sense of smell, or if this has smell, isn't that the biggest not l'kavana l'hariyach? So I could understand. In fact, Mr. Brewer in Reish Tezai and Sif Cut and Yud discusses one of our questions. Let's say you bought a fragrant fruit to smell and to eat. Good. Now, what do? What's your sequence? Which bracha do you make first? Reyach or achila? So chayra achila is the more significant hanah. That should go first. But then again, what comes first? First you smell and then you eat. So some say you have no choice. Make first on the reach and then achila. Mr. Brewer says, you know what you could do? Pick up the fruit, make a bracha on achila, take a bite, have a mind not to enjoy the smell until after you finish eating. So you see it works to have a not to smell. And as far as pashit, since the whole bracha is kavana lariach, so if you have a kavana lafucha, there's no chiyuv bracha. So I'm not sure why the Bechaz Abayis has a problem. You could pick it up, have a kavana not lariach, to taste it to see what to buy. Or certainly, if you're not sure if you have a sense of smell, you do with that attitude. Maybe he holds that once that you're buying perfume, maybe you're enjoying it, it's inevitable. But I think there's a good side to say there's no bracha because it's not kavana l'hariach. Someone asked me about an herbal tea that has a very nice fragrance. Do you make a bracha? So I'm not, herbal tea, very many herbal teas. But even if it has natural ingredients that have natural scents, smell, that taka grows, but most people don't drink tea for the smell. So this is like a food that's made la'achila, not la'reach, and therefore you ignore the smell. I'm smelling, but again, there's no chiyuv to wear a mask because there's no chiyuv bracha. Incidentally, mint is not a peri. Mint is a leaf, a grassy leaf. There's no tree to it, and therefore the bracha would be isvei pesanim. In fact, someone told me on Chalmoid Pesach, actually, I'm sorry, the Chalmoid Sukkis, he went to a herbal tea factory. And he says it was amazing to see a whole factory, but the mint flavoring, they didn't give access to the public. Because the smell of mint is so overwhelming, a person couldn't tolerate it. That's how strong the smell of mint is. And the truth is you can find even in the mountains, if you go, you'll find mint, I wouldn't call it leaves, it's mint, I wouldn't say grass either, it's a type of a plant. That is nice, that's the bracha of isvei pesamim. Someone had a question where he buys a melon, whether it's a cantaloupe, honeydew, or watermelon, and I'm talking about it has a qualifying smell, enough of a smell. Do you make a bracha on it, and what bracha do you make? And I'm talking about his kavanah is he picks up the big watermelon and he smells it, l'shem smelling, like to be halacha. So l'chayr you make a bracha. But his question is, since I make a bar priyadama on melon, maybe the bracha changes. So I asked him, what changes? Nice and reach toy beperis works for watermelon like it works for an apple. How do I know? Because what bracha do you make on watermelon? Bayre priyadama. No. So nice and reach toy beperis. It's perfect. And taka the kafachayim sitkot lamed zayin and it's kamat mefurish na lachas ketanis and beis kuf tezvav. Even on a bayre priyadama vegetable, if it has a smell, you make the bracha nice and reach toy beperis. Now I kept on saying a qualifying smell. Let me make my point. The metzias is, and I did my homework, you could trust me, I mean, people did the homework for me, I should say, I don't have the access to this, but people told me that the metzias is that since the 1950s, there's a dramatic decrease in the smell of fruits and vegetables. Now the reason very simply is, it's called the almighty dollar. They want to sell things, production, and they want to have a longer shelf life to fruits and vegetables. So they harvest the fruits and vegetables at an early stage, which means it has less fragrance to it, less smell to it. The Amos don't have to prove it, because if you look in the Torah gives two examples of fruits that have a strong fragrance, esrogim and apples, tapuchim. I mean, since it was in the Gan Eden, apples is a symbol of smell. Now you tell me, pick up a typical apple. Does it have a smell? I mean, it lasts like 3 months. A long time. Now, Lamaisa, this is the Metzias. It basically the smell is very minimal. So you have to make sure. It's hard to me. It's hard to quantify how much smell you have to have. But again, the fact is that fruits and vegetables have less smell. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Alicha Shleima, in the end of Rosh Hashanah, Perik Yud, he says, Gamo idna, ba'ofen shebar hadav sheyesh reach ma'alya, a lot of them. It was stored properly. Now again, it's very hard for me to give a klal But I could say it has to have enough of a smell. Now, this is different, very different than a different child. Someone asked me, because of COVID, he has a very faint sense of smell. Now, that's his problem. But what he's smelling has a full smell. This, the chevetz hamariach, is very limited. So you have to be careful. Before you're quick to make a bracha, make sure it has a strong smell. And we'll soon see some examples, but basically, today, the metzias is that the smell is not as strong as it used to be. I guess you read this hadairis has affected the smell as well, of fruits as well. Getting back, it's clear that on even a bar priadama, the bracha in fact would be reach type of Paris. Now listen to a fascinating yisoid. As I told you, in some shuls they have 5 different fragrances on Yom Kippur to be able to make 5 different brachas. Or people that have a shalom zacha on Yom Kippur shechal b'Shabbos, they can't give food obviously, they give different type of reichais besamim to make 5 brachas. Before you attend such a shalom zacha or you go to shul, you're going to have to do your homework. What's the order of the 5 brachas? Person you know, macha bracha. You don't know what bracha you're going to make, so you're going to make a stiller bracha, which gets you out of trouble without the right thing. So to make a long story short, I can't say it's the chol hadayis because it's a big machlokes, but it came out to us, the right order is the first bracha is boirei shem and orev that we make on afarsman, on balsam oil, which has an extremely unique smell, comes from Eretz Yisrael, because that's Paris Eretz Yisrael. The next question is, which is first, atzei or reach toiv? I think most people would say reach toiv Paris goes first because it's achila. But the Pri Megadim says no, atzei goes first. Because reach toiv Paris is a more general bracha. It includes fruits and vegetables. So it's more inclusive. Atzei is only a tree. In the hierarchy of brachas, the more specific it is, the more kedim it has. So atzei is limited. Reach toiv Paris includes even hadama. So therefore it's the bracha of shem and arev. Atzei, reach toiv Paris. Isvei is not even a tree. And of course, last is bari mineh pesamim, which is similar to the shaka and ibadvari. That's the last bracha. A fragrant mushroom, a mushroom that has a very strong smell, a qualifying smell. Believe it or not, we would think you make the bracha reach toiv Paris, but it's not true. Because since Shulchan Aruch at the beginning of Reish Dal it says on mushroom the bracha rishayna is shahakal, says the Kitzah in Nun Ches Hey, and actually the Kaf HaChaim and havdalah also says this. The bracha on mushrooms would be a boirei mineh pesamim. The next question, which is an interesting question, someone he's making havdalah and he made a bracha on pesamim, on cloves, and his son went to the cabinet, took out cinnamon and smelled that. So father says, why don't you use my pesamim? He says, I want to be sticky. That's the answer to all of our questions. They want to be sticky. But l'maisa, it's not so kedai to be sticky. I'll tell you why. Because you realize that what he did was not mutal l'chol hadayis. According to the Chazon Ish, it has to be oimid l'hariach. No, the pesamim that we have every Matzai Shabbos is oimid l'hariach. But cinnamon is made to eat. According to Chazon Ish, it's a bracha l'vatala. Plus, as we'll soon see, cinnamon, some say you make the bracha reach toiv Paris. And the Mishnah Berurah says in the beginning of Recited Zayin, makes the bracha of bar mineh pesamim on what's a bar mineh pesamim. So that's why it would not be kedai to chap anything. The only thing I would say, if he really wants to be sticky, he might take a little of the cinnamon out, put it on his hand, and you miyachad this cinnamon only l'reach, and after he throws it away, so that's no longer v'achila, and the Chazon Ish indicates such a eitzah would work. Question, someone's peeling a citrus fruit, let's say a grapefruit or orange, has a very strong smell. What bracha do you make when you're peeling and eating a citrus fruit? So I'm talking about your kavanas l'riach. So here we come to a fundamental question. And that is, should you make the regular bracha reach toiv Paris? Because don't forget, the Mishnah Berurah in Reish Bey Sif Katan Lamed Tes says if a person eats orange peels, even if it's candied or chocolate covered, the bracha is shahakal. It's not the peri, it's just a klifa. Oy bazoi, if the bracha rishayna changes, maybe birchas reach also. And indeed, Rabbi Kiva Eiga on the Shulchan Aruch on Sif Katan Gimel says klippas meransin, which is oranges, is a suffix bracha, and therefore, if you smell it, you make the bracha of Boirei Mine B'samim. How beautiful this is, that the bracha on Reach follows the bracha on Achila. The Kaf HaChaim, Sif Katan Tes, quotes the Chidah and others, and I saw a beautiful tshuva, the Shevet HaKosi, Chelik Beis, Simon Kuf, there's a Ba'ar Belza on Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, Chol HaMoed Pesach, because he was choshed that maybe some has chametz, he made the bracha on a toasted orange peel, strong smell of it. And he made the bracha bar min absamim. So people said, why bar min absamim? He says, why not? It's not a peri. However, the Aruch HaShulchan in Sif Yudal does not mention anybody else. He says, Nira, if you smell orange peels, you make a bracha reach type of peris. And the question is, it's not the original peri regarding bracha rishayna. So I think there's a pasha to cheshbon. And I looked and I saw the Yad Ephraim on the side, on the Magen Avraham Sif Katan Dal, I think means to say this. There's a big chilek between bracha rishayna and bracha achrayna. Bracha rishayna, it's the hana from the boirei pri ha'etz. What's the ik of the fruit? The orange, not the peel. So the peel is demoted to a shackle. But the bracha of reach is not on the hana of the eating. It's the Bershtaim gave us a fruit that grows on a tree, and in fact, it even has a good reach. So lemaisa on an orange peel fits beautifully, nice and reach type of peris, because initially the orange is the peel and the fruit. So that's part of the Shevach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And be'emes, the Rashba regarding Mei Vered, which means they took roses, which grows on a tree, on a bush, which is a tree, and he says it's different than other juices, because this is the essence of the reach. So it seems clear that there is a chilek between bracha rishayna and besamim, and I think that's what the Aruch HaShulchan held. But lamaisa, if so many poskim hold to make a boirei mine besamim, that's probably the right thing to do. But I will tell you, I don't know, someone called me and he asked me, he's growing on an otter she'ein anakiv. He has a little tree that has a very fragrant smell. It's not even for achila, it's a real besamim. What bracha does he make on when he smells that fragrant growth that's growing in an otter she'ein anakiv? So in Hilchas Brachas, it's a big issue because it's not considered a priya eitz priya adama. But I think it's pashit regarding Hilchas Berchas Reach. Since it's coming from the ground, it's in the ground, it's a tree, it's a wood, he told me it's a woody substance, the bracha definitely would be, since it's not a fruit, the bracha would be atzei besamim. And I think I found the poskim say that, because there is this distinct chilek between bracha rishayna and berchas reach. Another interesting question. A balabas is having a guest, and he brings out a very fragrant fruit to serve, to eat. The guest is bracha-minded, and he wants to make a bracha on the fruit. Can he make a bracha on the fruit? Says the Kaf HaChaim, Sif Katan Chavtes, no. Because since the balabas is calling the shots, he's the balabas, and his kavana is to eat it, it's not kavanas reach. I want to add, but let's say the guest is from, and he picks it up, to smell, would that help? I'm not sure. In fact, I think not. How do I know? Because the Mishtabur Reish Yud Zay and Sif Katan Yud says, let's say a person goes to a place and he's outside and inside there's a mace Nebuch laying there, and he smells the strong bison that was made for the mace. So the Mishtabur, it probably doesn't help even if he has kavana lahariach and makes a maisa. Because once it's gestempeled, once it's labeled as a non-reach, because it's there for a mace, you can make a bracha on it. So we see to the extent that when something has its identification as a non-boisim in halacha, it's a non-boisim. So I'm not sure this eitzah will help, because lamais at the end of the day, this was made for achila, and he's not the bail to change it. Question, someone asked me, when he enjoys the smell of wine, do you make a bracha? So the emes is, it's not so hard to believe that there's a bracha, because wine is boirei pri hagafen, and the bracha reach that prepares would fit. It's in a liquid form, so what? It's still just like it's pre-agafen. The only issue is you're looking Gemara Shulchan Aruch, there's no mention. And those days they drank wine. I think the cheshbon is pashut. Typically we drink wine for the beverage, for the shtia, not for the smell. But this person asked that he's more of a connoisseur, and he does like the real wine drinkers do. First you shake it, then you smell it, and then you drink it. I says, well, why do you smell it? Why in that sequence? He goes, well, the shaking brings out the smell, and when you smell something, you enjoy the taste more because smell and taste work side by side. He says, oy baza, you don't make a bracha. If the smell is only to enhance the achila, it's not like havana sarich. If you tell me I enjoy the smell as an ends for itself, then I don't see why you don't make a bracha. The Bajana Rav and Reish Tezai and Sifei seems to say that since it's not kavana l'hariach, you don't make a bracha on smell. If someone will say, but I enjoy the smell, I'm doing it for the smell, I don't see a reason not to make a bracha. Question: what's included in a peri regarding this shaila? And I'll give you a few examples. Is a coffee beans, is a lemon, oregano, bay leaves. So one thing is clear. The fact that it's a tree doesn't automatically give it the bracha of reach type of peiros. The biggest raya is that on hadassim, that is not an edible food, we make the bracha atzei besamim. So what comes to mind is esrog. The esrog grows on a tree, and the Gemara gives that as the primary example of reach type of peiros. Can anybody eat an esrog plain? Is an esrog ever eaten plain? So I want to make a point I think is important for the rest of the sugya. I had a big problem. Esrog, the Gemara gives an example as an edible fruit. Who eats esrog? So when I learned the sugya the first time, I asked someone, why doesn't don't the Rishonim talk about other fruits, oranges, grapefruits? Why is it only later achronim? Even lemons you only find first in the rush. So he told me, and someone else verified this, that originally, this world only had two citrus fruits, esrogim and pomelos, which look similar to a grapefruit. All the other citrus fruits that we have are grafts. You'll notice a similarity between grapefruit and pomelo. Bekitza, all the other fruits, citrus fruits, are grafts from esrogim and pomelos. It's very logical that either their esrogim were more edible before they cultivated it, or simply put, if that's the only fruits they had, they got used to eating it. And I'll prove it. In Sukkah Lamed Vav Mabez, the Gemara says it's a shocking statement. Reb Chanina matbel be'venafik. He ate the esrog and then he used it for a mitzvah. And everybody focuses, how could it be yotzeh? It's not complete. But how could he eat an esrog? Teretz says they ate esrogim. Today's esrogim no one eats. So we have to find a precedent to a fruit that grows on a tree that we don't eat typically by itself. I mean, we eat esrogim in a mixture, but what bracha do you make on that? So we have two leads. The Rosh in Siman Vav says that on cinnamon, you make the bracha reyach toiv bepeiros. Here, actually, peiros hadama to be more specific, but that's not the minig. Nice reyach toiv bepeiros. The Torah, and our Siman quotes the Rosh, but quotes the Mordechai, that says, no, you can't make a bracha reyach toiv bepeiros on cinnamon. No one eats plain cinnamon. What's the machlokes Rosh and Torah and Mordechai? Our shaila. There's no doubt about it, cinnamon grows on a tree. Cinnamon sticks, as it's called, grows on trees. But there's no doubt about it, no one bites into plain cinnamon. It has to be prepared and eaten with something else. So the Rosh held, but lamaisa, it's a prio eitz, and as we explained, it gives a smell. The Mordechai held, if you can't eat it plain, it's not considered a peiros. How do we paskin? Good question. The Shulchan Aruch seems to say in our Siman Reish Tezayin Siv Beis that on cinnamon you make the bracha Reyach Toiv Bepeiris. However, the later Paiskim and the Sharatzi and Paskins like this, that although it's a huge machlokes, you'll see, but at the end of the day, the minig is to make a Borei Min Psamim on cinnamon. The second Big sugya is cloves. We call them neglach, tzipirin, and lashon hakodesh. Cloves like we use on Matzoi Shabbos. Also, the mitzias, without doubt, grows on a tree. It's a prior eitz. The only way you ate cloves by grinding them, adding sugar, and making a candy which they ate. Ground cloves, sugar, and the Ramah paskins to make a bar pri eitz on the candy. Because the only way to eat cloves is making candy. But, as far as we're concerned, it's a prior eitz. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch, the same sieve bays on cinnamon and cloves, he actually spells out cloves, you make the bracha reach toiv b'peiros. The chiddush is that earlier in Reish Beis Tezayin, the Shulchan Aruch says you can't eat cloves. There's no bracha on clove, bracha rishayna. Zok the Magen Avram, the only way to eat is if you prepare it. And the Paiskim are surprised, the Mechaber says himself. Hilchas brachas, he says, there's no bracha on cloves, plain. Hilchas reach, you make the bracha of reach toiv b'peiros. But again, the answer, is like we said, if it grows on a tree, it's a peri, and it gives a smell, that could be the reach toiv b'peiros. No different than we said earlier from a peel of an orange. But again, at the end of the day, although the Mechaber says you make on cloves reach toiv b'peiros, the Mishnah Berurah and Sivkot Tezayin says the minig is to make boirei minei pesamim because no one eats it plain. In fact, Rabbi Tzina Abba Shol in his Chuvas Yudalad Lamavav says maybe even the Mechaber would agree today that nobody eats cloves. So avada the bracha can't be reach toiv b'peiros. But what to me is the biggest chiddush and the biggest insight, if you take a fragrant lemon, you buy a lemon that has a good strong smell, what bracha would you make on that? So what's the shayla? Reach toiv b'peiros. So up to Tzais HaShulchan and Samach Beis Sif Tes, our lemons are inedible plain. And therefore, if you smell it, you make a bracha, boirei minei pesamim. Everybody's getting demoted today. Cloves, cinnamon, lemons. But it's all the same yesod. It's all the chaim chakira. Do we closely follow Hilchas Brachos? Or no, this is a fruit. Now, to me, what's the biggest Einfall, the Ginas V'Rodin, who lived a few hundred years before the Tzais HaShulchan, in Klal Aleph, Sif Mem Beis, he mamish discussed what bracha reach you make on lemons. And he says, even though we don't eat it plain, but it grows on a tree, it's a peri, it's still the same bracha, just like cloves is a reach toiv b'peiros. And I think the Havana, like I told you, it's the benefit that the Baruch Shem gave us an edible fruit that is also fragrant. I don't eat it plain, who cares how you eat it, but it's a fruit. So it's very, troubling to me. What bracha do you make when you smell a lemon? I would say the Gimas Rada, the Tzei Shulchan, not to the Gimas Rada, obviously. But if he says not to make the bracha, I'm scared to make the bracha of reach toiv b'peiros. But what's really troubling to me? What bracha do you make on a esrog, a real fragrant esrog? So as we know, on Sukkot, the minig is not to make a bracha on the smell of an esrog. In fact, even when you're not doing a mitzvah, because it's miyuchad the mitzvah. But what bracha do you make on a pasala esrog or an esrog after Sukkot? So this is mamish of a Gemara. You make the bracha reach toiv b'peiros. But maybe things change today. Who eats a plain esrog? An esrog is less edible than a lemon. But no one says it changes. So that's why I think it's from esrog we could say lemons also doesn't change. As long as it's a fruit that's edible in some way. Esrogim is prepared. It could be candied. Some are eaten. So here we have a list of questions. So now here's my punchline. So now the shaila is, how do we advise someone that wants to make a 5 type of birchas besamim for Yom Kippur or Shalom Zacha Yom Kippur? What should he use for the reach toiv b'peiros? A lemon is not pashit. Maybe an esrog is not pashit. So what I thought, which might be more pashit, is coffee beans. Coffee beans, I have a bag here. These are real coffee beans. Coffee beans grow on a tree. Actually, it's the seed, the pit of a kaffir berry, and that's not edible. But you take out the pit, it's amazing. The fruit is not edible, but the pit, they roast it. And these are coffee beans. It has a very strong smell. The Ber Hativ in our Simon, Sif Cotton Zion, says if you smell freshly brewed coffee that's hot, you make a bracha of nice and rare type of Paris. Why? Why not? It grows on a tree, it's a fruit, and has a very strong smell. So if you make a bracha on brewed coffee from coffee grind that was ground, so the real thing, a full bean, why should it be different? The only problem I have with this is that typically on Yom Kippur, you can't keep the beans hot. And a good part of what makes the smell is freshly brewed coffee that's hot. So either you could invest in getting a blech for your coffee beans, or you could smell this, I'll leave it on the table afterwards, it has a strong smell without that being hot. So here I have a few choices to make the reach type of Paris. A lemon is a machlokes. Esrog, I think, is no one argues on a Gemara, you can make the bracha. Coffee beans is not a Gemara, but it has a strong smell. What's probably the best bet would be to get a really fragrant, edible fruit that has a strong smell. What you miyachar Yom Kippur, you're not going to use after tea because everybody touched it. That would be mutar l'chol hadayis. So you have a fragrant fruit, you have balsam oil, or then you have hadasim with bi'atzei, and barman somewhere is a simple shaila. The only thing is, do we make a bracha today on coffee, brewed coffee? So we know we have a reservation because you make coffee not for the smell. But again, I was talking about beans that you're going to use in Yom Kippur, you're not going to use them after Yom Kippur. This would be an option to make the bracha of rare type of Paris. Lamaisa, on one thing I think is easy, on spices, that's the easiest shaila. Spice, I mean oregano, bay leaves, pepper, which have a strong smell, not necessarily a sweet smell, but that all agree you don't make the bracha rare type of Paris. Because not only you can't eat it plain, no one eats it even prepared. It's only as a spice or something else. So that certainly the bracha would be not the bracha of reach type of Paris, but the bracha would be of atzei b'samim. And last but not least, unfortunately there's a shaylas negate. Too many people lost their sense of smell. What do they do by havdalah? Can they make a bracha? They might see their family, or since they can't smell, they can't make a bracha. So the Mechab at the end of Reish Tzadik Zayin says, no. You can make havdalah for someone in your family because of berachas mitzvahs yatsa moitzi. But the bracha b'samim is a berachas hanenin. And if you can't smell, you can't make a bracha. I on moitzi others, not for berachas hanenin. Comes again the halachas ketanis, beis kuf bei gimel, and the shvus yankiv and gimel chaf with a brilliant insight. And they both asked the kasha we began with. How could the Gemara say, is reyach? We enjoy, our bodies enjoy reyach. So they're both mechaven to the same yisoid. The Gemara is talking about our person lost his sense of smell. But listen, Rabbi, you say, and the Gemara is saying like this. If you have a stuffed nose temporarily, you can't make a bracha on besamim. But let's say the nose is clear, but a person lost his sense of smell, he could make a bracha for himself and for others. You can't smell, but besamim is the bracha that the guf, that the neshama is nana. You're making a bracha for the neshama. The Gemara is saying, of course, the guf and the neshama is nana. But even if you have no hana for the guf, because a taisran who can't smell, but even if the hana for the neshama, you can make a bracha. Now, if your nose is stuffed, apparently the neshama can't get to it. That's what they're assuming. But they both say it's a nice shot in the Gemara, but we go with the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore he should not make a bracha. A good gesunde Tag to you all.
Shane being I'd like to thank Rabbi Smith for the wonderful shir. Also like to ask the item to have in Zin, my brother Travar Fu Shalem, got the corona, Matrushloime ben Tzepoire, Lefu Shalem, Beser Shachar Yisrael, Venoimar, Amen. Also, Rabbi said the Besmedish made appeal, a worldwide appeal for Yad Yisrael. Everybody knows Yad Yisrael helps thousands of Russians of Achei Bnei Yisrael come back to Yiddishkeit, learn Torah, get married like Yid, do brisin, bar mitzvahs, mikveh, everything to have Taharas HaMishpacha. Please help out and make appeal once a year now. Here, charity. There's a card. They give a credit card to Regan Shir Torah, or give a check and make it made out to Yad Yisrael. But tremendous chus in this campaign to help out thousands of Yiddish kinder to come back to Yiddishkeit. Rabbi says, now a kleines chus. Please take a part right now. Come to the bima and take part of it. Tiskra mitzvahs. Abraham and Kashem and Gosh Baruch Lazak is all the figure here, but I'm telling mitzvah Shnei Madan Chofetz Man Sitka Yagdil Torah v'Yadir. Amen. The sequel is after Mincha. Rabbi said, please take part in Yad Yisrael. I'll give you checks now and a credit card by the Beamer. Rabbi Deutsch is waiting for your card. This is